Hello, this is Professor Michael Lipey, and I am going to be talking this time about interpersonal attraction. In fact, we're going to be looking at the kinds of factors that go into um, liking of others. What determines whether a person likes or is liked by another? And liking, of course, may also lead to friendship and continued interaction. And for that reason, liking is a pretty important topic. Because remember the need to belong. Indeed, as we've seen, that's a basic in basic need of human beings. Okay, we're born with reflexes that orient us toward people. Okay, basic human motive, one of several that we've been talking about um, in previous narrations. We deeply care about what other people think of us. It's an important thing. Okay, we spend much time and money trying to make ourselves presentable and attractive. Um, the concern about what others think of us is something that can lead to social anxiety in some individuals. Okay, nervousness about you will I be liked? Okay, will I be able to be friends with this person? Um, and indeed, the research is pretty clear that people with a network of close social ties tend to be happier, healthier, more satisfied with life than people who are more isolated. Indeed, loneliness can be a very agonizing, sad state to be in. Okay, and indeed, as well, one of the things that sometimes contributes to loneliness is shyness. Shyness is a pervasive problem with very painful consequences. Okay, um, more people are shy than you think. Okay, and when people are shy, um, they can become very inhibited in interacting with others, and their very behavior of acting in a withdrawn kind of inhibited way because they're shy and anxious, okay, can actually make the extremely shy person seem less likable. And if you get vibes about that and you're a really shy person, that can, of course, contribute to your shyness. Shyness can be an inborn personality trait, can also be learned, okay, as a reaction to, interactions with other people that have sort of been negative, okay, or not sort of, have been negative. And loneliness is a feeling of deprivation about existing social relations. People who um, uh, and it's a variable kind of thing. Okay, we may feel deprived because we've only got a couple of friends. Okay, or if we uh, hope to have many. Okay, and want to have many, or have lost a number of them. People who but loneliness is most severe when people feel like there really is no one for them to talk to hang with, and what have you. Okay. Um, and people experience loneliness most often during times of transition, disruption, going from high school to college, okay, getting married, okay. Indeed, you would think that that one might have the opposite kind of impact, okay, less lonely, but you can alleviate your loneliness with your partner, but in some cases, that kind of transition causes loss of other kinds of relationships. So, loneliness is complex, but most likely it occurs during transitional times, times in which life is disrupted um, and out of the flow. Um, and some people, unfortunately, are chronically lonely. Okay. Now, the loneliest group in America, actually, are adolescents and young adults, people between the ages of 18 and 30. Okay, and of course, if we look at that group, that is the group that probably goes through the most transitions and disruptions during these very, you know, developing and maturing years of early adulthood. And of course, people employ various strategies to combat loneliness. Okay, and this is something that there is some discussion of in the textbook. Um, Very interesting set of individual differences associated with it. But right now, we need to move on to what are the determinants of liking, okay, which of course, being liked and approaching others may be, of course, the important antidote to loneliness. So there's a number of theoretical perspectives that can be applied to many aspects of attraction. Again, we're going to be talking about interpersonal attraction and the factors um, that affect it. Okay. And we can look at several theoretical perspectives, some of which we've seen in the course. Okay, so there are consistency and balance theories. Okay, recall the whole idea of cognitive consistency. Recall all the discussion and research that was reviewed having to do with cognitive dissonance. Okay, bottom line, we're not real comfortable with inconsistency, and we often take steps to resolve it. Okay, into a more consistent state of affairs in our mind. Okay, the basic assumption is that people prefer consistency in their thoughts, their evaluations of others. Okay, and inconsistency or imbalance is psychologically uncomfortable. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on in the course when we talk about things like attitude similarity, uh, reciprocity of between people and things like that. Okay. Now, of course, the second assumption is always that imbalanced or inconsistent situations shift toward balance. Okay, and there's lots of implication then in terms of uh, potentially affecting our perceptions of other people that we may or may not be attracted to. Reinforcement or reward theory. Okay, so the whole idea, basic learning theory, that um, you know, we come to like people associated with positive experiences, rewards, and to dislike people associated with negative experiences, punishment. Okay, and we'll see what some of those experiences and factors look like as we proceed. Okay, and then there's an evolutionary perspective, uh, which I can't get to the bottom of this for some reason, but this is actually going to be talked about. Isn't We're not going to be talking about the evolutionary perspective in this narration. In any case, that's going to be in a lecture outline. But the whole idea is that people exhibit patterns of attraction and mate selection that basically have been favored in terms of evolutionary self-selection. Okay, that's another topic which we'll get to in an outline, and is also discussed in your textbook. Okay, so some determinants of initial attraction and the beginnings of friendship. Okay, well, the first factors to parafactors closely tied in with each other are proximity and familiarity. Okay, we'll also talk about the personal qualities, of course, of the person that you're forming a judgment of liking or less liking of. Okay, and we'll talk about things like physical attractiveness, the positivity of the person, and the rewardingness of another person. Okay, uh, the extent to which the person expresses liking toward you, agrees with your views, flatters you, etc. The rewardingness, the positive experiences you have in that person's presence. Okay, so that's another determinant. Okay, similarity is a huge determinant. okay, which we'll talk in more detail about, okay. So then we have a whole uh, set of determinants here to kind of um, look through as we move forward, okay, which we'll do next, okay. So here we're talking about the initial attraction. What are the things, what are the factors that initially attract you to someone, okay, that initially make you be inclined to like the person? Well, one of the factors, remember we talked about proximity and familiarity. Well, familiarity, being there, okay. To whom are we most likely to become attracted, okay? Interestingly, okay, there are two basic and necessary factors in the process of becoming attracted to someone, and they are proximity and they are exposure, okay. These may be the most significant ultimate predictors of whether or not you're going to become friends with someone, okay. So the proximity effect, okay. The single best predictor of attraction is physical proximity, what we could call nearness, okay. So for example, where we live influences the friends we make. So college students tend to date those who live either nearby or in the same type of housing as they do. You're much more likely to date some, if for example you're living on campus, on a campus that's large and has many um, uh, many different dormitories, okay, you're more likely to end up dating someone or just become friends with other people who live near you in the same dorm building as opposed to the one next door or on the other side of the quad, okay. Whoops. Wanted to pursue that a little bit more because it goes beyond college students tending to date those who live either nearby or in the same type of housing as they do. As it turns out, we are much more traditionally, people have been much more likely to, for example, have long-term friends and to marry others who basically live, okay, or lived during uh, the, their socialization, their younger years, their school years, and then beyond, okay, within a mile or so, as opposed to radiuses that extend beyond that, okay. And of course, there's a number of reasons for that, including the likelihood that you're just going to be exposed to people who are nearby and interact with them, okay. But so basically, a lot has to do with the circumstances of where you are and where others are. The nearer they are, the more likely you are to become friends with them. Uh, Now, I'll talk briefly about an interesting study done many years ago after World War II, in the early 50s, actually. That was actually done by Leon Festinger and his colleagues. He, of course, being the father of cognitive dissonance theory. So Festinger and their colleagues took advantage of something that was happening at MIT, in which um, they were building graduate student dorms, okay, apartment complexes, okay, they basically were. And they were randomly assigning, lots and lots of people coming back from the war. There was the GI Bill. Um, and so lots of, you know, former soldiers were going to college, and people in general were just basically flocking to universities. So there was great influx, and they needed this student housing, okay. So they had built these apartments for these were actually for married students, okay, that basically were like um, basically long buildings, okay, which had outdoor entrances, okay, and there were like 6 apartments side by side on the first floor, okay, and then there were 6 apartments with the front doors side by side on the second floor, and you had to take the steps up. to get to the second floor. There were steps at one end of the long building, apartment building, and steps on the other side, okay, other end. So what the researchers did, okay, was they were able to basically survey and follow, okay, people who had been randomly assigned to these apartments um, over a period of, a year, okay. And what they were able to measure, okay, were things like who they became friends with, okay, who they liked, okay, a lot, okay, and then they were able to correlate the answers, with how close, with the proximity of the others. And of course, people began as complete strangers. And it turned out that the people that you were most likely to, that the students were most likely to become friends with, okay, were the person who lived in the apartment right next door, okay. And then the probability that you became friends with the person uh, went down a little bit if we moved one over. So the one apartment removed, and there was like this correlation is that the further away the apartment was, okay, the the more likely, okay, I'm sorry, the less likely you were to become friends and to hang out with the people living in that apartment, okay, and that you would rate as a friend of yours, okay. And the people who were living on the same floor, for example, the second floor, okay, were much more likely to become friends with people who were lived on the same floor versus people who lived on the bottom floor. Okay, if we're looking at the upper floor, the more likely to become friends with people living on their floor than people living on the bottom floor. And if you lived on the bottom floor, you're more likely to become friends and to hang out with people who were in the bottom and in the lower level, okay, than people in the higher level. Despite the fact that those people, okay, living below you, okay, or above you, okay, were just as physically close, okay, as people living on your floor, okay. But the key factor is the frequency of exposure, the frequency, okay, with which, so the people living on the bottom floor, if you're on the top floor, aren't ever going to basically be on your floor passing your apartment, okay. The people who are living on the same floor as you, but way at the other end, and there's steps on both sides, are less likely to pass by your apartment than people who are right near you and will take the same set of steps that you will. Okay, so it all was driven by proximity. Okay, which affected the likelihood and the degree of exposure to the other person, which in turn affected the likelihood that you would become friends. Okay, those are called the Westgate apartment studies. Okay, now this ties in with the mere exposure effect. Okay, now the mere exposure effect is this idea, okay, that now you've heard the term familiarity breeds contempt. Okay, in reality, the opposite is true. Familiarity breeds contentment. Okay, the more familiar you are with something or someone, the more likely you are to have a positive evaluation or to like that something or that someone. Okay, that's the mere exposure effect. The more often we are exposed to a stimulus, the more we come to like that stimulus, and that includes people. So the mere exposure effect has been researched up and down for a number of years, and it works with physical objects like artwork, okay, uh, you know, songs, okay, where you can manipulate the number of times someone is exposed to a stimulus that was otherwise new to them to begin with, okay. And the general idea is that unless it's a real awful thing to begin with, if it's just a neutral kind of stimulus to begin with, the more often you're exposed to it, the more the higher you will rate it in terms of its liking. Okay, and that occurs. There's actually been studies in which stimuli have been presented subliminally, and you manipulate the the number of times that stimulus is presented. And even when people don't even realize that they're being presented with the stimulus and how many times they're being presented with it, the more often it was presented subliminally, the more people tend to rate it positively. Okay, so that's an amazing kind of thing. Okay, having to do with preconscious kind of exposure to things and how that can even influence people. Now, when I say that includes people, okay, um, so remember Bob Zions, he of the uh, of the of social facilitation fame. Zions did some classic work on this mere exposure effect, uh, and he did this ingenious study with people in which it was the whole lab situation was arranged, okay, in this large room as a as a liquid, a tasting little study. Okay, so people there were all these various kinds of drinks that people were to sample from, okay, and give their ratings of how much they liked it and what they liked about that that drink, okay. Um, and he had it set up so that there were like several different cubicles, okay, set up like little bars with a bar, okay, with a table with a bar, and a couple of chairs, okay. So two people could be doing the study, sampling these drinks at the same time, okay, in each of the different rooms. And what subjects were asked to do, they think they're taking part of a uh, a tasting survey. Okay, they basically would have to go to each room, okay, each little cubicle set up as a bar, and sample the products and the drinks in each one. Okay, then go move on to the next one. Okay, giving their ratings as they went along. Okay, now at any given time, there were like a half a dozen people participating as participants in the study. Okay, and what Zions was able to do was arrange it so that you're in the same room sampling the drinks, okay, um, with a given person, okay, either only once, okay, twice, okay, or more times, okay. I think it went up to uh, you could among the people that you were exposed to. I think there were 9 people in a given session, and so you could have been exposed to a person anywhere from 1 to 9 times being in the same room with the person. Not sure what to 9, but but either a large number of times or just a very small number of times that you ran across this person, okay, as you were sampling. And after the study's done and people have done all their ratings, they were reminded, you were doing this with a bunch of other people, okay, and it would help us because sometimes it influences the ratings of the drinks, to give us a sense of what you thought of your co-participants, okay. So people rated the extent to which they liked or enjoyed the company, which didn't really involve any interaction. You're just in the same room, okay, sampling drinks, okay, of each person. And the really clear finding was that the more often people had simply sat next to another person, okay, while sampling a drink, okay, the more they liked them. So people who had only run across another person and sat next to them once or twice, okay, rated the person, gave the person lower likability ratings than someone they had encountered, say, 5, 6, 7 times, okay. So there was this clear mere exposure effect. The more often there was exposure, the more the person, the stranger, was liked, okay. Now, there's an interesting correlate. So this is a really important aspect of proximity and familiarity as a driver, right? Okay, mere exposure effect, huge social psychological truth. Okay. Now, interestingly, familiarity can also influence our self-evaluations. Okay. So, for example, it's pretty clear from research that we like the face we see in the mirror more than the face others see. Remember, when you see yourself in the mirror, the image is flipped. Okay, it's a mirror image. Okay, from what people looking directly at you see. Okay. Now we're going to actually see an example of that in just a moment. Okay, or some research on that. Okay, but there are limitations to the mirror exposure effect, though. Okay, repeated exposure to an initially disliked stimulus may breed more contempt. Okay, that is, the general rule is that exposure to a neutral or mildly positive stimulus, the more you're exposed to it, the more you like it. Okay, that's the general rule. That's the mere exposure effect. But stimuli that are disliked to begin with, okay, for example, a person who is really, really kind of dislikable for some reason, okay, the more you're exposed to that person, uh, probably the less likely you're going to like the person. That's you're going to get the polarization the other direction. Okay, because our initial thoughts, if they're neutral or slightly positive, those are the thoughts that tend to carry us through as we have further exposure. But if our initial thoughts about the person or the thing are negative to begin with, that's going to color how we react to subsequent exposures. So, general rule, the more the exposure to a neutral or positive stimulus, mildly positive stimulus, the more we like it. Okay. The greater the exposure to a negative or disliked stimulus, the less we like it. All right. And the other thing about the mere exposure effect is that too much, well, I should say too much exposure can reduce the impact of familiarity. So overexposure, you can reverse the familiarity effect, the mere exposure effect. And you've known this as, boy, I'm so sick of seeing this. Okay, that's the kind of sense that we're talking about. All right. So merely seeing someone's face and name makes them more likable. That's what research has been shows. That's the mere exposure effect. The effect probably helped our ancestors survive. Okay, what we're more familiar with uh, would give a sense of trustworthiness, safeness. Okay, and so if we had this positive reaction to a person, okay, that was basically a heuristic cue that okay, there's no need to less need to kind of defend yourself or be prepared for something negative. Okay, implications in the modern age. Mirrors and photos. The face we are most familiar with is our own. Camera exposure is the same as mirror exposure. So we're now attracted to people that look like us. Okay? Because we have so much familiarity with our own face, okay? Then, so we like it a lot, if you will. Okay, we have this great level of familiarity. So that kind of generalizes to seeing faces like ours, okay? So that we have a positive reaction to them. And that is a partial explanation to the idea that we tend to be attracted to people that look like us. Now, here's an interesting study, okay? So This study basically involved the computer blending of faces, okay? So here's a voter, okay? A potential a participant in the study I'm going to talk about. Okay, and here is George Bush. Okay, and what people are presented with, okay, were images of candidates, okay, and um, and their preference for candidates, okay, and what the participants were presented with was basically a we'll use George Bush as one example in the study. This is Bush. That's Bush. Okay, at least back in the 2000s. Okay, and here is a computer blending. Okay, of Bush's face and this guy's face. Okay, so that's a 60-40 blend. So it's 60% Bush and 40% this voter. Okay. Whoops. Now the voter, so then people are presented with either this picture or this picture in their ratings of candidates and so on, and the extent to what extent are they going to prefer, in this case, George Bush? Okay. And what was found was that people exposed to picture of George Bush blended with their own face, okay, liked him or preferred Bush even more or more than if they were just presented with Bush's face, okay. So when our face gets kind of incorporated into, uh, you know, into the candidate's face, okay, makes it more familiar to us, at least at some unconscious level, okay, and we like it more, okay. Fascinating, right? All right, moving along. So let's take one more example of the familiarity effect, okay, that we've been talking about, driven by mere exposure, okay. So here's a study in which participants in this study were randomly assigned to chat by email with a previously unknown partner. And what is manipulated is the number of times in a week that the participant had to chat with a given partner versus so they had several partners, okay, um, and they chatted with them at various points in time, okay. Um, so what we can look at is we can look at the number of chats you had that the participant had with the partner, okay. And actually, in another study, it was just this one partner, but they only were exposed to them once, twice, four times, six times, or eight times, okay, depending for participants were. And you can see that the ratings of the partner were notably higher the greater the amount of exposure to the person, the greater the number of chats, okay. And that actually uh, uh, led into their desire to stay in contact. Okay, so people ask, to what extent you want to, keep your contact going with this person? And the more often they had chatted by email with the person, the more likely they were to say, yeah, I'd like to, the greater the percentage of people, partners were, that said, yeah, I want to stay in contact with this person. Okay, so that's a clear example um, of the familiarity effect. The greater the exposure, the more you like the uh, the target. Okay, now let's talk about physical attractiveness. Okay, so as you're not surprised to know, we react more favorably to others who are physically attractive than to those who are not. Okay, very reliable relationship. And the bias for beauty, okay, if you will, pervasive. Okay, So let's look more closely at it. Okay. So one of the classic studies, when there was a lot of research going on how physical attractiveness, okay, affects how attracted are to the extent to which we're going to like another person. Okay, so these were the classic, we'll call them computer dating studies that were conducted beginning in the mid '60s. Okay, and in the so basically in these studies, college students are randomly assigned to dates and later asked how much they like the date and their desire to go out with that date again. So basically, you're invited. You're a student. These are at a university. You're invited to take part in this study. You you provide all kinds of information about yourself. Okay, you provide a picture of yourself. You provide all kinds of of information, and your understanding is that this information will be used to match you up with another person, right? Okay. In fact, what the researchers would do in these studies, collect these data, but then assign people to dates, and these were heterosexual male-female dates, okay, randomly. So you were just randomly assigned, if you were a participant, to have a date, okay, an initial date with another person, okay, a random person, okay. Um, so then, this is a big study. So then you go out on your date, okay, and then after the date, you report back to the researchers, okay, the people who organized this computer dating uh, event, okay, um, and you basically report to what extent did you like your date, okay, a couple of some rating scales, and how much would you like to go out with that date again, okay. So the researchers have this feedback from you about your date for the participants, okay, and they also have the data that the participants provided about themselves, okay. So they can actually look at how physically and they in turn, since they have your picture, okay, they had raters rate how physically attractive the participants were. So they have ratings of participants' physical attractiveness. They have all kinds of information like their attitudes and their interests and things like that. Okay, and then they can correlate those factors with the extent to which a date was liked and desired to be going out with again. And what they found really strongly, okay, was that the best predictor of liking, the best predictor of seeking a second date and actually going on a second date, okay, was the physical attractiveness of the date. Okay. How attractive the date was the best predictor of whether the participant wanted to like that person and sought another date with that person. This was true for males and females. Okay, powerful effect. Okay, now as we're going to find out, okay, as this was pursued further, okay, and there were second dates, the better predictor uh, the better predictor turned out to be similarity if they went even further on their dates in their interactions. Okay, and we'll get to that soon. But in terms of initial attractiveness, physical attractiveness carried the day. Oops. Now, is physical beauty an objective or subjective quality? Well, that's been an argument for the ages. Some people argue that certain faces are inherently more attractive than others. Okay, that beauty is an inherent quality, okay, and has some dimensions. There's some evidence for that. So, for example, if we go across ages and cultures, okay, there's high levels of agreement for facial ratings in terms of how beautiful or attractive the face is across ages and across cultures. Okay. Certain physical features of the face are reliably associated with judgments of attractiveness. Okay. So, as we saw, baby face, okay, tends to be, we've seen this previously, associated with being attractive. Other kinds of features as well, higher cheekbones, things like that. But anyways, there does seem to be some agreement of what constitutes an attractive face, okay? So that would suggest that beauty is an objective quality, okay? We also know that uh, baby preference studies, where they're basically you look at, how much time they spend looking at one or both of getting presented with a pair of pictures of a traditionally attractive person or a less attractive person, okay, um, as rated by adults, okay, you can kind of get the baby's preference by looking at how much time they spend looking at or gazing at one face versus the other. And it turns out babies prefer faces that are considered attractive by adults, so even babies. Then there's the argument that it's subjective, okay? It seems very an objective quality in terms of faces, okay? But it also is the case when we get broader, okay, uh, kinds of definitions or broader aspects of the person. People from different cultures, for example, enhance their beauty in very different ways. So different ways of enhancing one's beauty is very subjective. Okay, so what's found an attractive thing um, to do to yourself in one part of the world is often seen as repulsive in another part of the world. Ideal body shapes vary across cultures as well as among racial groups, within a culture, as we know in the United States. Standards of beauty change over time. So, for example, just one of the oft used examples of is uh, for for white people. Okay, was that um, darker, if you will, tanned skin. Okay, is tends to be rated more highly as something that's kind of attractive than really pale. Okay, uh, and in fact, um, that tends to be the case now. But in the 1800s and before, okay, if anything, the opposite was true. Very pale, indeed, the makeup was very, very light, made you look very, very pale. Really light skin was considered more attractive than darker skin among white individuals. Okay, um, because that connoted perhaps a more of a life of leisure. You're not in the fields or working outside, getting, which would be connoted by having this kind of darker complexion or tanned complexion. Okay, um, back in the 1800s, more uh, um, fuller bodies, okay, more buxomous women were considered more attractive because that also connoted, privilege, okay, if you will. So the standards of beauty do change over time, okay, at least for non facial kinds of qualities, okay, and of course situational factors also influence judgments of beauty, okay. Remember the perceptual contrast effect that we saw when we were talking about Cialdini's influence principles. Okay, so interesting little side note here is the whole idea of social comparison, okay, and how it tends to make one feel, okay. So, and in terms of really attractiveness, okay, um, how it may affect our mood, okay. So here we're looking at the mood created by men and women, okay, looking at photos of a man or a woman, same sex or opposite sex, that was either attractive or average, okay. Now, if we look at opposite sex photos, okay, so men looking at photos of women or women looking at photos of men, okay, um, how would looking at a really attractive photo, okay, affect their mood relative to looking at an average photo, okay? And as you can see, and not surprisingly, when you're looking at an attractive photo, it has a positive effect on your mood, suggesting that physical attractiveness is kind of is kind of rewarding. Just to look at someone who's really, really kind of attractive, it puts you in a more positive mood if it's a person of the opposite sex, okay, compared to looking at an average. Okay, so you're a man looking at either an attractive woman or a more average looking woman, and your mood's going to be elevated when you look at the attractive photo, okay, woman. Okay, but what about the same sex? Here's where it gets kind of interesting. Okay, so so let's say you're a man looking at pictures of another man, okay, or a woman looking at photos of another woman, okay. If the if it's an average, okay, looking person, it's kind of like, it's a meh kind of effect on your mood. If it's an attractive person of the same sex, okay, you actually your mood sours a little bit. Okay, when we look at attractive people, okay, who are of the same sex versus less attractive people, a highly attractive person, okay, of the same sex can be a downer, okay, because you're doing social comparison. You're thinking, I'm not measuring up. It kind of sours your mood, okay. You know, women and men experience this all the time. So, women sometimes may get deflated by seeing these pictures of like drop dead, unrealistically gorgeous women, okay? Because you're implicitly going to do the social comparison. Same thing happens to men when you're looking at like this kind of hunky, handsome guy, okay, versus just an average-looking guy, okay. All right, so that's a good example of how the situation, indeed, the target, whether the target shares or doesn't share your gender, okay, can affect how you feel when you see attractive others. Okay, so why are we blinded by beauty? Okay, well, this gets us into the what is beautiful is good stereotype. Okay, okay, we have a stereotype about beauty. Okay, and the stereotype is that physically attractive people possess other desirable personality characteristics. Okay, the stereotype sort of confers, other things being equal, and it's an overgeneralization. The idea that attractive people will have other good personality features. They'll be more likable. They'll be more conversational. Okay, they're going to be more intelligent or whatever. Okay, and so we have that stereotype. Okay, which may affect liking. Okay, the stereotype has only a kernel of truth, particularly when it comes to uh, some of these other qualities, as we'll see in a moment. Okay, um, and it also is the case that it can be inherently rewarding to be in the company of people who are aesthetically appealing. We get extrinsic rewards of being able to look at them. Okay, um, and being in their company can lead to other kinds of kind of rewarding experiences. Okay, based on their attractiveness. Okay. Um, All right. So the what is good is beautiful stereotype. Okay. So attractive people are judged to be smart, happy, well-adjusted, socially skilled, confident, and assertive, and also vain. Okay. That's the stereotype. Is the stereotype accurate? Well, it turns out that good-looking people do have more friends, better social skills, and a more active sex life. But beauty is not related to objective measures of intelligence, personality, adjustment, or self-esteem. And the specific nature of the stereotype, it really depends on cultural conceptions of what is good. Okay? But this middle bullet here, notice that belies the stereotype that we have. Okay? Um, but the stereotype exists. Okay? And it does drive our perceptions. Okay? And our ratings. Being good looking does not guarantee health, high self esteem, happiness. Okay? And there is an attributional problem with being good looking. Okay? Is the attention and praise one receives due to one's talents or just one's good looks? Okay. Now this is a real kind of issue, and it's been researched, and many, particularly women, will tell you about this attributional problem they have, which can kind of mess up their own self-esteem. So here's a good example of this attributional problem of not knowing whether you're being reacted to because you're beautiful or because you have ability, if you will. Okay. Uh, so this is in this particular study, uh, women basically in this study engaged in a task that involved you know, a number of things, including writing and and presentation and things like that. Okay, um, and we're talking about not physical presentation. Okay, presenting a piece of work. Okay. Um, Describing the work and things like that. Okay, so so they submitted their work, okay, um, to other people, okay, and they submitted it, okay, in a way in which they were either uh, unseen, okay, that there was no that the people they were submitting to, the evaluators, could not see them, okay, or the evaluators could see them, okay. So so they thought they were seen, okay, or they thought they were unseen. Now, if we look at the physically unattractive participants, okay, so then they're asked, why did you get such? And they get a really good evaluation from the person. They're asking, so why do you think you got such a good evaluation? Okay, and they were asked, well, it was, one of the things was the quality of my work. Okay, it was really, really good. Okay, so you can see that if they were seen, okay, they actually conclude more readily that the quality of their work drove their the good evaluation they got compared to when they were unseen. It's as if being seen, okay, and you're unattractive, so you got a good rating in spite of that, of not being so attractive, so it must be the quality of the work. But if you were physically attractive participant, okay, they actually attribute less, okay, they conclude their quality of work was the um, was the reason for their high evaluation less if they could be seen than if we could not be seen. Okay, because when they were seen, they presented their work. Okay, well, the good evaluation could have to do with their beauty. Okay, or it could have to do with the quality of their work. And so with that dilemma, they become less likely to think it was the quality of their work. So you get this whole difference in terms of how you receive feedback, good feedback, depending on whether or not your beauty could be judged or not. Okay, and there are other costs of beauty. Now, this, of course, we've sort of digressed from factors that determine attraction. Okay, we're stuck here on beauty and physical attractiveness, which is a huge variable. Okay, we're digressing a little bit to talk about, so it's going to help you to be beautiful. Okay, to be liked and get high ratings, but there are problems associated with this. Okay, um, that all men and women uh, who are attractive probably know about. Okay. So there are other costs of beauty. There's pressure to maintain one's appearance. Those are particularly strong when it comes to the body in our country. Okay. Women are more likely than men to suffer from the quote modern mania for slenderness. You know all about the anorexia and bulimia kinds of frequency that is some quite high in our culture. Uh, So overall, being beautiful is a mixed blessing. Okay, and in fact, Alan Burchard, who actually was one of the really a world-renowned researcher on attraction and relationships. Okay, she actually was the author of the original computer dating study, and she spent a career basically studying attraction and attractiveness. Okay. Um, she reviewed lots of research, and there's little relationship between what your appearance is in youth and your later happiness. Okay, so now we've talked about your exposure, we've talked about familiarity, we've talked about um, attractiveness and so on. Now we need to talk about a few other variables, but we're going to go beyond beauty, okay? But I'm going to do that in a subsequent narration, okay? Because this one got pretty long, and I'm probably going to need another half an hour to finish up. So let's do that in a second narration.